What's going on, everyone? It's Bales, and welcome back to another episode of AFL Fantasy Head2Head, where we put two players up against each other to see who will be picking for 2024. This is episode 19 of the series. If you haven't checked out the other 18 episodes, make sure you do. We're nearly episode 20, which is very exciting. That would be double the episodes we had last year, which is fantastic. So thank you for all the support you guys have shown so far. As always, if you are enjoying the content around here, make sure you do click a like on the video as well, and also subscribe to the channel. It really does help out as we try and reach 2,000 subscribers. And if you're listening on the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and review. That is also very much appreciated. If you leave a review, me and Tim might even be able to read it out during a live Twitter space for you, or podcast if you're listening to it. But joining me, another special guest from the coaches panel. We're making our way through the coaches panel. We only got one person left after this on the coaches panel, which hopefully we'll be able to get him on. But joining me is Jordox from the coaches panel. He's also the head moderator of FSC Addicts on Facebook. Jordox, mate, how are you?
I'm great, mate. Thanks for having me on. This is a fantastic series. I've been enjoying it. So good to get on. Good to meet you. We've been chatting for a bit. Yep. So nice to have a chat about, a couple of very interesting potential options for us this year.
Yeah, exactly right. No, it's great to have you on, mate. It's always good to get some good guests around the community and great coaches. And we're talking about another couple of forwards, probably a couple of the almost forgotten forwards, if you look at it. Sort of a lot of people talking about Ukraine Flanders. Obviously, me and DC from Hat Chat had an episode on those two. So if you're keen to sort of listen to a few more episodes with forwards, make sure you do check that one out. But this time we're looking at Dustin Martin and Caleb Daniel. So couple of guys that haven't been talked about as much. Dusty Martin only 6.76% owned at 812K, and Caleb Daniel 1K cheaper at 811K, owned by 5.02%. But he has got that mid forward status, whereas Dusty is just the forward. So I'll be taking Dusty today, and Jordox will be taking Caleb Daniel. We'll start off with Dusty Martin being the 1K cheaper that he is. It's a lot of cash potentially, depending on if you need that 1K. But let's talk about Dusty Martin. So Dusty Martin has been a guy that's been relevant for a number of years, but I think in fantasy, especially AFL fantasy, he's been a guy that's been frustrating the last few years because he's been a guy that's still got a fair bit of the ball. Like, he's still been able to get his 25, 30 touches a game, but he's always sort of lacked that mark tackle game. He had that big year in, I want to say that it was 2017 when Richmond won the premiership.
That was the Brownlow year.
Crows. Yeah, the Brownlow year, 2017. I want to forget as a Crows fan, but we're talking about Dusty, so I've got to remember it. 111.4 he averaged in that year. And then even the year before, he averaged 107 in 2016 and 101.7 the year before that. So they're the only 3 seasons he's averaged over 100. He's had a lot of 90s in there and a couple of high 80s averages, but last couple of years, so he averaged 70.9 in 2022. So a little bit of a drop off there, had a few injuries and stuff like that to deal with. Only played the 9 games. Even his CBAs were like downish, down a fair bit actually, 37% compared to the 70 and 76% in 2021 and 2020 that he had. Last year was only 18%, but he was able to get involved a lot more up the ground. So he was able to get involved in a lot of that transitional play for Richmond, but also then be able to hit the scoreboard. So he averaged 90 points last year. From his 20 games. But this year, there's been a lot of chatter that he's actually training in the midfield. So that's what makes him relevant, is that if he's training back in the midfield and going to go back into that midfield role, in a forward line where we don't have many options, when you've essentially only got probably the top sort of 5 primos that people are looking at in terms of Jack Macrae, Sam Flanders, Dusty Martin, Caleb Daniel, and then Dylan Moore. They're probably only 5 people are really looking at. And if Dusty's playing the midfield, he sort of elevates himself into that category that you could really start him. And the fact that I think Louis mentioned this on, I can't remember if it was a pod episode or the coaches panel episode. I think it might have been coaches panel during the 50 most relevant. If you haven't checked out that series, which Jordox has been a part of, obviously over there at the coaches panel, make sure you check that. It's a great series. I'm sure all of you watched it anyway, but if you don't, then what are you doing? Get over there and get through it, because it's always great chat about all the players and gives you some angles of probably you didn't think of some of the players. But in saying that, Dusty Martin actually had the highest floor of any of those forward premiums last year. So his lowest score from 2023 was actually, as an ad pops up on my screen while I'm trying to look at it, his lowest score last year for the Tigers was actually 60 points. And that was actually, went back-to-back 60s. But take those 2 out. Well, actually, he had 3 games under 70, 4 games under 70, sorry. So he had 4 60s. But his floor was high because a lot of those forwards did pop up some some pretty stinker scores. So, Josh, I'll go to you for this one. So this is where we'll bring the bye for Dusty Martin in. So obviously Caleb Daniel, we don't have to worry about. So that's obviously a tick in his favour. But with Dusty Martin, he's got that opening round bye. But the good thing is he's got the opening bye in round 6. So it's a little bit different. So if we get other forwards that pop and you can have him for 5 weeks and he's not top 6 forward, you can trade him out at that point. Talk about this a bit with Jaden Short on the Jaden Short and Lockie Whitfield episode. But then if he becomes a top 6 forward, you can keep him. So what are your thoughts with Dusty having that opening round bye? Is it still an issue for you because he is one of those forward premiums, or are you sort of looking at it a bit differently because he's got that later bye?
I think initially in the preseason, those early buys were it was pretty easy to quickly dismiss players from there. But as the preseason's rolled on and we've all talked about it and looked at the various strategies, I think the fact that it is a later early buy does help the idea of starting a Dusty Martin. And even on the flip side, if he's not doing well, you can ship him off. But if he is, you can hold him. And by that point, our benches and our squads will be a lot stronger than, say, the guys in the round 2 bye. So the ability to cover someone like that would be much better. It's going to be hard not to pick a Daniel over Dusty if they're split. I think the bye could be quite a good tiebreaker, the fact that one has one and the other doesn't. But I think with Dusty, he was someone, earlier in the preseason, again, I really didn't give him too many thoughts. Not any disrespect to him, obviously, absolute superstar of the game, but it's felt like for some time now, for a few years, his fantasy career has been just about over the hill. Now, the way he ended 2023 with a series of he didn't score less than 90 post the bye. He played 7 out of 9 games and averaged 100 in that period. Yeah, coupled with the fact,
if you want me to reel off the scores just quickly here for you, 114 in round 13, which I think was just before his bye, and then a 91, and then obviously came out round 17, 91, 94, 97, 90, 90, 127, and 113. So as you said, really, really strong numbers.
And the CBAs weren't through the roof. It wasn't like he was playing all of a sudden as a full-time mid again post-bye. It was more or less, really. Yeah, it was similar to what he'd been doing. He just was finding the pill more. So now we've got the situation where there's a new coach, and we read so many track watch tweets and articles, and we love it. You got to take some of them with a grain of salt, but we love it. It's what we live for. We got nothing else to look at this point. There's been no games.
Yeah.
So when I see something like Dusty's in career best shape physically, which is important because he has had a lot of issues with his body in the last few years, and the fact that they're going to look at playing him as more of a midfielder than they have in recent years, all of a sudden from a month or so ago when I probably didn't even consider him, now we've got this niggling injury for Jack McRae. There's question marks on Flanders with his early bye. All of a sudden, Dusty's quite relevant again. And I actually had a laugh. I was reading something the other day, and we sort of talked about Dusty, Yo, and Fife. And I thought, have we gone in a time warp? These guys are relevant. Yeah. I never thought so. Not that we're saying to get those guys, of course, but no, he's very much in the conversation again, Dusty. And, we'll talk about Daniel a bit later. I'll go through some of his stuff, but he's certainly someone to look at. Another thing I noticed or tried to find out with Dusty to try and sort of, mount an argument, what happened post-bye? Why did he score better? And a pretty common sort of thing in the conversation with Taranto has been with or without Hopper. So I thought, I wonder if the absence of Hopper helped Dusty. And I can tell you it didn't. He averaged 6 less points in games where Hopper was missing. So a fit and firing Hopper should mean a good scoring Dusty.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, as you said, it's quite funny that we're talking about the Fifes, Yos, and Dusties again. It's like, as you said, it's just like this. We've got a time warp. It's quite funny.
Grundy and Gorn in the rucks. It's
set and forget. Yeah, exactly right. It is a funny world. Guthrie as well, a little bit, and even to an extent, Alliance a couple of years ago, we sort of thought that he won the Brownlow, and all of a sudden he went off a cliff, and now he's a bit relevant as well. But So the final thing we'll touch on with Dusty before we move on to Caleb Daniel is that I did mention that his tackle numbers and his mark numbers has always been low. Like the years that he went well, his mark numbers were a little bit more up because he was able to just essentially just be involved so much. Whereas since those couple of years where he went over 100, he hasn't really averaged a of marks. So I'm just going to go through his averages for marks and tackles. So in the years that he averaged over 100, he averaged 4.1 marks a game and 3.5 tackles. And then in 2016, 4.5 marks and 3.6 tackles. So really hasn't, looking at these numbers, it hasn't actually changed considerably. It was really from 2020 to 2022 where his numbers did fall off a little bit. Even last year averaged his highest marks per game since 2014, which was 4.7 marks a game, which is actually quite an interesting stat there. But is this not as much of an issue because of the forward line and because there's not as many options? And if he can even just average that 95 for us and just get a lot of the ball playing midfield, do you think that the marks and tackles isn't really an issue? Or is that something you still have to consider even with him being a forward?
Well, I guess it's hard because they've got a new coach, and I'm pretty sure Dusty's played his whole career under the one coach. Yep, that would be right. And then obviously there was McQualter as the caretaker. So we'll see what Uze brings, and it's important to try and find out what sort of game style they're going to have. It's very hard to know at this point because if it is a game style that lends itself to more of those, holding, possessing the ball, Richmond under Dimmer were more of they just go forward at almost at all costs and just get the ball in there, even kick it along the ground and let their pressure spill it out and score from that way.
In the forward line as well.
Yep. So it just depends on what their game plan is going to be, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like. It's really hard with Dusty because he's there, and the end of last year was really positive. It'd just be not unusual, I guess, not common for a player to sort of peak in their fantasy career and then right at the end peak again, go up again. So yeah, and he's never really been a huge dream team fantasy guy, right? He's been a great super coach.
Yeah,
he had that cracking year when he won the Brownlow and then those years, but in recent years he hasn't been. So I think if you do start at Dusty, you got to be realistic with your expectations, and I think it would be a case of a guy that hits 90s for you while we wait and see what the rest of the forward line looks like in 2024. And by that I mean which player is going to pop that we don't know right now. There's a whole list that we're trying to pick. Your Connor McDonald's, your Sardises, even a Josh Rochelle. Who are going to be the guys? We don't know yet. Plus, you're going to have the DPPs that come in. So I think realistically with Dusty, if you start him, he's sort of just going to keep a spot for you, hitting 90s, and then maybe we look at, later in the year what we do with him.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny because this is such a good comparison. When I first initially was sort of thinking about this comparison, I thought, is this, how relevant is it going to be because of people maybe not liking Daniel and then Dusty having to buy? But when you think about it, McRae with this hamstring sort of like awareness injury, whatever, low-grade hamstring, whatever he's got. Then you got Flanders. Obviously, he's got that early buy. I obviously talked about in the episode with DC about that, the grounds that Flanders is playing at as well, and sort of opponents, and that makes it a bit tricky with him. And then even and Dylan Moore's the other one, but it really sort of catapults Dustin Caleb Daniel into a lot of people's calculations because of the question marks around these other guys. So you've got to consider all these guys are thinking. In saying that, we'll move over to Caleb Daniel, who I'd be really interested to see what you're going to say about him, Jordox, because I think a lot of us don't quite know what role he's going to play. If he's going to be defense, forward, midfield. So why should people be considering Caleb Daniel in 2024?
Well, he's the forgotten man. You touched on it at the start, Dusty, as well. He's a guy that I just haven't seen anyone talk about at all. And I think any conversation I've really seen on a Caleb Daniel has been quite quickly dismissed. No, you can't. And I get why, because historically he has been a guy that has sort of played in different positions, had ceilings, had very, very, very low basements, particularly down in Ballarat. I'll talk about that.
He plays there around, yeah.
Yep. But let's look at his 2023 and what actually happened, because for all of his career, majority of his career. He's been a great halfback, a great rebound 50 guy, good accumulator, gets plenty of the ball, zips in and out, gets the 1-2 handballs. That's sort of been his craft, and he's been very good at it. And last year, I don't know why. It's not like the Bulldogs don't have a huge amount of midfielders. Dunkley went out. Let's just run with that theory. Dunkley went out, and they put Caleb Daniel in the middle. And I have gone through his season, his scoring, and trying to find trends of like, okay, this game he had heaps of CBAs, centre bounce attendances, and he scored really well. This game he didn't. I'm trying to find where he best fits. And the long and short of it is he's almost like a Callum Mills. Let's call him a Callum Mills light, because he's obviously not as good as Callum Mills has been over the last few years. So he had only 19% CBAs for the season. And there were games where they moved him back to the back line and he didn't play any midfield. So I want to look at his best patch of the season. I want to talk about this patch between rounds 7 and 14. In that period, he averaged 108, which is pretty fantastic. Yeah, right. Now, Adam Treloar missed 3 of those games. I'm not suggesting that means if Treloar's out, he'll score well. That was the only sort of main absentee I could see in that patch that could explain anything. So he had 19% CBAs for the year. In this patch, he attended over 40% CBAs in 5 of those 8 games. But in one of the games, he had 0%, and it was his season high score, 136. So this is a guy who, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think whether he plays down back or he plays in the guts, he scores well. And when I say scores well, he's not going to be necessarily a top 6, top of the line. But this is a guy that's pretty much averaged high 80s to low 90s for his whole career. I mean, I don't think he's dropped under that for many years. So he had 9 tons in the year, and one of them over 120. If you want to compare that to Dusty, he had 6, and he also had 1 over 120. Yep. His points per minute, which is something I've been raving about this preseason because I think it's such a great indicator of a player's worth in fantasy. So his points per minute were 0.9 and Dusty's was 0.85. So fairly similar there. Mars Stadium down in Ballarat is a interesting stadium. So the Bulldogs play about 2 games a year there. All right. So his lowest score in 2023 was a 39 at that stadium. And I looked into that game. His time on ground was healthy, I think 76%. I looked through the match notes. There weren't any injuries. There may have been a tag that wasn't reported, but he scored 39. And that will remind...
Was that the game against the Crows? Was that the Crows?
No, that was when the Giants upset them, came from behind.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
And beat them late. And that was kind of the start of the Giants pushing towards a prelim.
It was was it Bont got tagged? I'm pretty sure. There was nothing on Callum. I think it was Callum Ward went to Bont or something, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. He scored, I think, mid-80s Bont. That was one of his worst ones. I think this was the game too where the Giants were up, by a point or 2 and they had the kick in from full back, the Dogs, and they had about 30 seconds or whatever it was. And Tim English took it. Yeah. He played on and took a few bounces. Yeah. Poor guy had that happen. Caleb Daniel should have taken it. He would have scored more than 39. He would have hit a 42.
A 40 would have looked a little bit better.
Yeah. Now, back in 2021, he also scored a 20 at that ground. I'm going to run with it being a bit of a coincidence. So I think that ground doesn't suit the halfback type style role. I think if he's playing midfield in that role, he'll be okay. They've got a game at Mars pretty early this year. They've got 2 games. Yeah, against the Sun. Is that like that's like round 2 or 3 or like
That's
really
round 2.
early?
Yeah, that was the one before the Gold Coast bye.
Yes, so that's going to frighten people a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at his kick-ins, because a guy like that, you can always bank on points from kick-ins. So in 2022, he took 27% of the Bulldogs kick-ins, which is a pretty healthy number. That's more than 1 in 4. In 2023, he only took 5%.
Yeah.
Now, he played on every time. Good boy. That's what we like to see. Get out of the square and kick it. But that tells me that role change was very real. And with the emergence of, say, a Bailey Dale, Ed Richards in the last couple of years, I can see the Bulldogs. Well. Yep, JJ, of course. I can see the Doggies using him as more of a midfielder than a defender again this year. And that doesn't make a lot of sense because he's available as a forward. So I don't know. Do you know, Bales, how he ended up with that forward status? He must have been running in off a flank for
I think it had a lot to do. I think it had a lot to do with that. He was almost playing like a similar role like Bailey Smith was playing. He was really sort of in that forward line. I don't quite know exactly if there'd be numbers here in terms of like where they lined up in terms of positions.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's got anything with this, but yeah, I would assume it would have to be something like, he played a lot of those games where he rested forward, went to the midfield instead of playing in defence, going to the midfield. That's the only way I can explain that.
And I'm glad you said Bailey Smith, because, obviously it's terrible that he's out for the year. It's shocking news for him. But the opportunities that does sort of present, there's a few players, you got the kid Sanders, who's, going to be very good and probably in from round 1. You've got, James Harms, who came across, who can fill a role that's pretty similar to a Bailey Smith. And then you've got Caleb Daniel, who I think plays a similar role. So I think that'll be his role this year. I don't say it with any confidence, because who really knows? We know who their coach is, of course. The other thing too, just quickly, the disposals and marks were down on 2022, even though his average was slightly better. But his tackles doubled. And he went from kicking 0 goals in 2022 to kicking 10 in 2023. So you can see that role change very, very evident in the numbers there. Disposal and marks slightly down, tackles and goals up. So, look, I don't know. He's a tough one to sort of put that money on, that outlay. You'd like to pay a little less. But I think he's quite similar to Dusty. I think, you've got to be realistic with your expectations if you do start him. But know that he's a pretty safe 90s guy and has been for some time, even in this new midfield / half forward role.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see. Again, the Dogs midfield is going to be they're one of those teams that I think them, the Crows, and even Hawthorn, just their midfield mixes are going to be really interesting, because it's going to tell a lot, because it's going to tell us a lot about McRae and Caleb Daniel in there, and even Riley Sanders. But we're all starting him. He looks an absolute jet, and he looks like he's going to be a star of our fantasy teams for a long time. So we'll be very interesting to see. But time has come to pick between the two forwards. So, Jordox, mate, who are you picking between Dustin Martin and Caleb Daniel for 2024 in this head-to-head battle?
As much as I love what I'm hearing about Dusty being in good nick and playing more mid, I think I'd feel safer with Caleb Daniel, just knowing that if there is a role change in a game and he has to go back to defence, he'll still score. Whereas if there's a bit of a change up for Dusty and he has to go deep forward, one out of the square to win the game for him, his scoring may dry up. And also the fact I am a Crows fan too, so I haven't been a big fan of Dusty since 2017.
If Dusty didn't have the bye, I think I'd be siding with him. But that bye, it is relevant, and I know it is round 6, so it's not as much of an issue. But I still think that if you got a guy there, they're very, very similar. I think that if he does have an extra bye, he is going to be playing one less game. So I think that is a bit of a deciding factor. But that Mars game does scare me a bit in round 2 for Caleb Daniel. So whether that means you start him, or maybe you wait for him and maybe start a Jack McRae or someone else instead, that could be a play. But yeah, I think Caleb Daniel, if you're looking between the two, I'd be picking him, I think. But it is a good comparison. I really enjoyed this episode, actually. So, but that will do it for the head-to-head episode for episode 19. Let us know in the comments below. Put in the comments what you think about Dustin Martin and Caleb Daniel in Fantasy 2020. Also, put in the comments as well if you guys are starting either of them or any other general questions you guys have got. Please put them down below. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like. That'd be very much appreciated. We get 50 people like this video. That'd be hugely appreciated. And also subscribe to the channel as we try to reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of the season. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or wherever, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. It'd be very much appreciated. But thanks, Jordox, mate, for jumping on another episode. Going through the Hat Chat sticker book. I've put another sticker in the book with Jordox is in there. Thanks for jumping on, mate. Where can the people find you across socials? And also, what can people be expecting from you and the coaches panel in 2024?
Yeah, thanks, mate. Good to be on. Like I said, I love what you're doing, mate. It's a really good program, this Versus series. It's really, really good. And, there's going to be people who right up until the start of round 1 will come back to these sorts of videos because they'll be trying to split hairs at the very end. So good work. I'm on X at Jordox2020. There's a lot going on with the coaches panel this year. It's pretty exciting. We're going to have an extra podcast than what was usually. There's going to be 2 a week now, I'm pretty sure. But right now we're just in the thick of the 50 most relevant, which is getting right up to the pointy edge. So keep watching those, listening out for those, and staying tuned.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've been loving the series, and this will be aired after the episode that I was on with MJ for talking Jordan Dawson. So if you guys want to check that out, then make sure you do. But if you're sick of hearing me, check out the other 49 episodes or the other ones, except that one that have been uploaded by that time. And also, I know MJ said as well, make sure you guys get around the coaches panel Patreon as well. I think it's as little as $2 a month where you get all the bonus features and stuff like that. Jordox, what are some of the bonus features people can get involved with if they sign up for the Patreon?
Well, I know by the time this is airing, we are right towards the end of the 50 most relevant, but the Patreons get to hear the episode a day earlier than the general public. We also have lots of extra articles and features like videos and that sort of stuff as well. So it's going to be a big year for Coaches Panel. Got a lot of sort of new people joining and getting involved, and I really feel like it's building this year. So get in, get a part of it, and good luck, everyone, for your 24 season.
Yeah, exactly right. And also, Coach Panel got the YouTube as well, so make sure you do go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. So make sure you do that. But and you can find me at bailshd on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you do all the good stuff like share, subscribe, 5-star ratings, all that good stuff. It's very much appreciated. Support you guys' show. In episode 20 of the series, I've got another special guest on, chatting about a couple of players. The exact players haven't been quite locked in yet, but we will be chatting through some really relevant players for you guys to have a listen to. But until that episode, we'll catch you guys then. So we're out. Cheers.